Your Excellencies, Honorable Governors, distinguished delegates, we invite you to take your seats. We will begin. We thank you sincerely for your patience this morning. I know after last night's activities, we're all energized and invigorated for the final day here at the 2018 AFI Global Policy Forum. It's so good to see you all here this morning. We'll begin, of course, ladies and gentlemen, very shortly with the launch, a very special announcement that will be made from the Eastern Europe and Central Asia Regional Initiative. But just one or two housekeeping announcements. Before we begin, please, if you can switch your mobile devices to silent or vibrate mode at this time, we'd really appreciate it. Also, a kind request from the AFI team, as soon as you get a chance, please go on the app, complete the evaluation. We really, really would like to hear from you. Your feedback, your thoughts will help us with regards to the planning of our other workshops and the next GPF. So please make sure you're using the app. With regards to our agenda today, that's all on the app as well, and you can receive all our updates in that regard. But we'll begin with the launch this morning by the Eastern Europe and Central Asia Regional Initiative. Just 2 days ago, on Wednesday 5th, ladies and gentlemen, the leaders of ECA approved the launch of AFI Regional Initiative in ECA. This will be the 5th AFI Regional Initiative, and it is part of AFI's Phase 3 strategy in facilitating in-country implementation of financial inclusion policies and regulations that address country-specific regional needs. I'd like to invite the newly appointed chair from the Central Bank of Armenia, Aminuhe Mirkichan, to please come up. Let's give a round of applause. And also the co-chair from the Bank of Russia, Mikhail Mamuta. Let's also give him a round of applause.
Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, distinguished guests, peers, colleagues, friends, AFI team. Hope this last stretching day will be successful and fun and nice one. I would like, before starting, I would like to call on stage the members. I know not all of them here, some of them left, but members of countries, member countries of this regional initiatives. Tajikistan, please, if you are here. Belarus, I know you left, but just in case. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Mongolia. Did we left? And we are here. Russia is here. Firstly, let me express my gratitude and sincere appreciation to Bank of Russia and Mikhail for great hosting, excellent organization of this event, and my sincere appreciation to AFI for taking financial inclusion lead for 10 years on international fora. This is some job that really needs some appreciation and reflection how much is done. And it's symbolic that National Initiative for Eastern Europe and Central Asia is launched in Sochi here, in the region. So nothing can be better organized, you know. Here we have countries from Tajikistan, Armenia, Russia, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Mongolia, and unfortunately Georgia couldn't join us this time, but they are with us in their hearts at least. And I would like to thank my peers, countries, that they trusted the chairman to be chair of this initiative to Armenia. And thanks to Bank of Russia, Mikhail, to generously agreeing to co-chair, because it's not something that easy to lead for. And how come regional initiative started? Like every, at least GPF, we met together, and all the time recent years, we are raising the same challenges, raising the same issues, and we're finding that we need to focus our efforts and to find general guidelines that are acceptable to all of us, to our country context. And these meetings were all the time, and the need for regional initiatives that can make this happen matured like recent years, and this year it was the last kind of culminating point when we decided to, yes, we need to launch it. In this region, we have common challenges, and there are 4 broad themes that were identified for the beginning. We have a lot of migrants, and remittances and transactions cross-border are like joint part of our lives. So we need to have interoperable systems and regulations for market conduct regulation, market conduct supervision, consumer protection, complaints handling, as well as financial education initiatives that can be, like, with all our countries, harmonized and applied the same way, as well as we very much focus on behavioral insights and designing market conduct policies and financial education policies in under behavioral insights. Armenia has some advancements in these areas, and Bank of Russia has very also advancements in especially digital areas. And with that regard, we trust that jointly we can stand sound this initiative for the first year, and then our colleagues from other countries can take this initiative later on, and this initiative can be sound, successful, fruitful, and with many deliverables provided. Thank you so much, and joyful day for today. And maybe Mikhail can say a few words.
Thank you very much, Armenia. And we have one more country joined us right during the speech. Yeah. First of all, I think it's a very nice logo. Don't you think so? We've spent many hours discussing this, because you know that everything depends on how you call it and how it looks like. So I think that it looks like really nice. So if speak seriously, this initiative is a very important one. And first of all, we approved that now we joined the family of AFI regional initiatives, because our region was the last one, I believe, big region, without such initiative. I think that we have very core reasons to launch it, because as Armenia already told, we all are connected by very different links, which makes us like a single, right? But at the same time, we are all very specific. And every macro region has more or less the same approach. We have many common things and we have many unique things, right, to keep in mind. But I believe that at least for our regional initiative, for our region, this kind of common interests that we see all together is something that will allow us to reach real success here. And those 4 focus areas that we selected all together are very important. And I hope that our work very quickly will, let's say, give us some results. And we have very active chair, so she already talked of everything in this initiative, which makes me more or less confident that we will reach real success really soon. And Russia is definitely interested to be active part of it, so that's why we decided to agree to be a co-chair. Well, now I hope that step by step we will develop a real plan of actions and move forward together. And I also hope that you, representatives of other regional initiatives, will share with us your experience, your maybe some lessons learned, and it will allow us to reach results with less costs and with more efficiency. So thank you very much again. I would like to thank again all the countries who joined, and maybe invite more countries from our region to join, because it's open platform, of course. It's not like an elite club, for sure. We have more spaces, so you are very, very welcome. And let me also wish you a very good last working day of the conference. Let me hope that yesterday evening was great and you enjoyed this, because I personally enjoyed it, and I hope you did too. And let me wish all of us the very good, let's say, end of the forum, and wish you a very good, safe trip at your home. Thank you very much again.
And if our colleagues would like to say something, yeah?
Good morning, dear colleagues and dear guests. It is with our pleasure to launch our regional initiative. We are one region with common history and common values. We have big aspirations, and we look forward to develop our unique experience knowledge exchange products, and also we look forward to learn from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Let's give them another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, as we congratulate them. And of course, the invitation has been extended to all of you as well, those who wish to be a part of their group, and also those who wish to share. I'm sure they look forward to any input from all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable governors and your excellencies, we will now move straight into our first plenary session for today. It's the Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion, a dialogue with the G20. And I'd like to invite our panelists to come up on stage. Mr. Lazarus Kamanga, the Director, Banking, Currency and Payment Systems, Bank of Zambia. I'd like to invite him to come up and take your seat, please. Mr. Gabriel Bizama, the Director, Financial Inclusion, Ministry of Finance, Argentina. Let's give them a round of applause. Mr. Wolfgang Bucher, the Head of Financial Sector Development at GIZ, Germany. And Ms. Zaira Luna, the Deputy General Director, Access to Finance, CNBV, Mexico. Our moderator for this session, ladies and gentlemen, Robin Newham, the Alliance for Financial Inclusion. Let's give them a round of applause.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, governors, deputy governors, distinguished guests. So we've come to the last day of our gathering, and the sun has been shining on us all week, but today we're seeing the storm clouds rolling in. So perhaps we may take that as a signal that it's almost time to go home. But before we do so, we have some very important topics still to discuss, starting with this session this morning, a dialogue with the G20 Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion. And I think at an event that is themed around AFI's 10th birthday, it's actually very appropriate to have this discussion here with the GPFI, because for 8 of the 10 years of AFI's existence, we have been an implementing partner of the GPFI since its inception at the G20 Summit in Seoul, Korea in 2010. AFI members since then have participated in every GPFI forum, from Riviera Maya to Riyadh, the first to the most recent. And AFI members have also contributed to key work streams of the GPFI, including the G20 peer learning program on national inclusion strategies, and also the development of the G20 principles for digital financial services. And the GPFI, in turn, has done tremendous work in elevating the importance of financial inclusion within the G20 and keeping it at the top of the global agenda. And that's very important for us because the G20 is not only one of the most powerful economic and financial bodies in the world, but it also has an important role in setting the direction and priorities for the global standard-setting bodies and for other international organizations. Now, one of the interesting features of the GPFI is that it is governed by a troika system, a Russian word, of course, which means that the current, future, and the past G20 presidencies serve as the three co-chairs. And that allows for a great deal of continuity, and we're lucky to have two of the co-chairs, Argentina and Germany, represented here today. But it also allows for each incoming presidency to inject its own thought leadership and to set out its own priorities for the global financial inclusion agenda. And this year, in 2018, Argentina has assumed the presidency, led by the Ministry of Finance and represented here today by Mr. Gabriel Bezama. So I would like to start this morning by asking Gabriel about the priority themes under Argentina's presidency. We know you have focused on the theme of digitization and informality. So I'd like to invite you to share with the members more about why you chose that theme and what's been achieved this year in terms of the deliverables.
Yes, thank you, Robin, for that. First of all, I would like to thank AFI and the Bank of Russia for giving me the chance to be here and provide you an overview of the work of the G20 and the GPFI under the Argentina's presidency in 2018. So as Robin mentioned, the central topic of our presidency was interaction between digitization and informality, and why has Argentina chosen this topic? So well, when we were defining our priorities, we have noted that informality is an important and relevant demand constraint and driver for financial exclusion. So basically those individuals and small businesses operating or engaging in economic activities outside the formal economy find it particularly difficult to access and use financial services. So those who are in the formal economy, basically they don't have, or they lack the ability to comply with all the documentary requirements, so eligibility is a key, plays a key role here. So as we all know, digitization offer the potential to enable broad-based financial inclusion, and basically new technologies and new digital approaches together with effective supervision, as I always like to mention, the financial stability risk. So digitalization with effective supervision basically could expand the scope, scale, and reach of financial services. As we have heard along this week, I think we have a great opportunity to leverage this. And we as policymakers, I think that we need to work with the private sector, understand the needs of consumers, and understand the business of the private sector as to work together and foster this good opportunity. So based on this central topic, we have developed the G20 policy guide. I have a copy of this here. And we have selected 4 policy areas that we think that they have the great potential to harness digitalization and financial inclusion. These 4 policy areas are first, digital identity, so how available technology could improve the identification and verification of new customers while complying with AML and CFT regulations. We have heard a lot about this during this week, so I will not go into details on this. Secondly, the promotion of digital payments. So we believe that making payments affordable is not enough. There is a need to develop an interoperable payment infrastructure and create the right incentives for consumers to use digital payments and retailers and merchants to accept digital payments. And third, the use of alternative data for credit reporting. So basically, if you are in the informal sector, probably you will not be able to evidence your repayment capacity. So basically the use of alternative data could fill that gap. So when I mean alternative data, this is financial information and non-financial information. So financial alternative data could be all the financial transactions that we carry out every day, maybe the payment of utility bills, basically the payments make digitally, but also non-financial information. So when we engage with social media, when we use our smartphones, when a small business use iCloud services, all that data and use that data in a responsible way could basically improve the access to credit. So that will take me to the last policy area that is that I like to refer to it as the quality piece of the delivery of financial services. That is financial consumer protection, financial literacy, and data protection. And basically, we believe that it's relevant to build trust and confidence in the acquisition and use of financial services. And this could be done by having a sound consumer protection framework, strengthening financial literacy skills, and also finding the right balance between data protection regulation and technology. So based on that, we have produced a policy guide. It was approved by finance ministers and central bank governors of the G20 in late July. And in terms of next steps, what we are doing for the rest of the year, and when we finish the Troika, that is going to be by the end of 2019, we are working on the implementation stage of the policy recommendations, and you will hear a little bit of that with my colleagues of the Bank of Zambia and from Mexico.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. And if I could ask you one follow-up question. This challenge of informality that you've outlined is very complex and quite persistent in many countries in the AFI network. You're seeing a role for digital financial inclusion in addressing that, but there may also need to be other kinds of policy reforms in labor market reforms, taxation policy, and so on. So how do you see the interaction between financial inclusion and those other policy areas to address informality?
Yes, I think that is a really good question. I think that, and that was a concern raised by many G20 countries when we were developing the G20 policy guide. And we acknowledge that, we acknowledge that informality is a complex issue, that basically it requires policy action from different perspectives, from a tax, regulatory, transparency, labor perspective. So our view is that digitalization is a tool to help addressing informality. It could be a first step towards formalization in the long run. So basically by increasing the amount of traceable transactions, that could help addressing informality. A good example that is covered under the G20 policy guide, that is in the piece of digital payments. One of the incentives that we have include there is tax incentives. So basically, if I'm in the informal sector, one of the reasons of that could be the tax burden, and just to be honest, that could happen. So basically, although we know that there is no evidence right now that says that by implementing the tax evidence that promotes financial inclusion, there are many countries such as Uruguay that in the recent years they have implemented tax incentives, like, for example, the reduction of VAT, or you don't pay VAT if you make a payment electronically. So I think that that are a couple of examples of other kind of policies that could be implemented to address informality.
Thank you, Gabriel. And I'd like to bring in now two AFI members, Lazarus and Zaira. You've heard Gabriel set out Argentina's priorities around digitization and informality. I'd like to ask you, how does this theme resonate with you? And how would you look to use the G20 policy guide on this topic that has been produced? I'll start with you, Lazarus, please.
Thank you very much, Robin. I think we would like to welcome the G20 policy guide. And we, as the Bank of Zambia, we are participating in one pilot project where the Bank of Argentina is going to provide some technical assistance in terms of digital ID, so what we are calling digital onboarding. And under this particular pilot project, what we are aiming at is to improve the identification of both individuals and the small businesses in terms of them being financially included. This project will entail us, as the Bank of Zambia, to undertake a review of our regulatory framework in terms of civil registration and ID formalities. From where we sit currently, I think we have a national ID system, but I think it is a paper-based system. So we think with where we are in the 21st century, where technology has really moved, it's our view that we need to move away from that and try to embrace technology in order for us to change our ID system. Another area where we have to critically look at is the issue of KYC. We need to align our KYC requirements with this new system. Now, in order for us to do all this, it will require a lot of stakeholder engagement. And in particular, we have to deal with the issue of the government departments that are issuing these various IDs. Currently, there's already a project in our country where we are trying to digitize, and we hope with the technical assistance from Argentina on this particular issue, we'll be able to move that project much quicker and ensure that maybe before the end of 2020, we could start issuing this digital ID. So from the Bank of Zambia point of view, I think that is the angle where we are engaged with the G20.
Thank you. So we already have some practical collaboration going on with Zambia. And Zaira, how about in Mexico's case? What's your take on informality and digitization?
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Well, this policy guide represents a very thorough analysis and guide on a very important subject. That is how to increase financial inclusion in the informal sector. In Mexico, the financial authorities have taken several steps to increase financial inclusion through digitalization and taking into account of all the points stated in that guidance. Some of the examples are the FinTech law, for example, enacted in March of this year. One of the principal objectives of this law is to foster financial inclusion. This law regulates now electronic payments, crowdfunding platforms. It also establishes a regulatory sandbox for innovative models, and also we are adopting the National Banking and Securities Commission with new areas to supervise these new kind of technologies and models. This law also reforms the law on credit reporting issues, the financial consumer protection law, and the law to prevent and identify illicit money operations to adequate these laws to the financial fintech environment. Also, crowdfunding schemes and e-payments will make it easier for excluded individuals and firms and schemes and MSMEs to have access to credit and use of electronic payments, and in the process to incorporate them to the formal financial services. Another example is that, for example, all the federal government payrolls is done by digital payments. The transfer of governmental social programs is done through digital means. The accounts of the main program represent about 7 million accounts, most of them women in rural areas, for example. Another important thing is for the retirement. The National Commission for the Savings and Retirement System offers plans to informal or independent workers and to use mobile apps so they can access to the services offered by the savings for retirement entities, and in this way they can be included in the formal financial sector. Another very important thing is, for example, for people that don't have don't have an identification. Mexico has a tiered account system. So the most used level of this kind of accounts are the tier 2 accounts, And these accounts may be opened remotely, and you don't need an identification to obtain it, but you have some limits of operations that are a monthly deposit limit of approximately $900 or $1,800 in case that the account receive a social transfer program, for example. And also in Mexico, we have a regime of fiscal incorporation, regime that allows a tax exemption for the first 2 years, and then a gradual increase until reaching the 100% of the tax payment in 10 years. So it is very important, for example, for MSMEs. The National Policy for Financial Inclusion states that programs that foster the financial inclusion of the excluded population and MSMEs will be implemented. And finally, the National Strategy on Financial Education establishes that specific programs will be established for different segments of the population, and that innovative delivery channels will be used to deliver the financial education programs.
Thank you so much, Zaira. So I think we can see many areas where Mexico is working, where the topics covered in the policy guide will be very relevant indeed. I'd like to bring in now Wolfgang Wecker. Wolfgang is representing Germany here, who had the presidency of the G20 in 2017. But Germany is continuing to lead the G20's work this year on the financial inclusion of forcibly displaced persons, and has the task of meeting the finance minister's request to develop a roadmap for inclusion of FDPs by the end of this year. So I'd like to ask Wolfgang, what's your assessment of the progress that's been made on this topic and the challenges we still face?
Yeah, thank you, Robin. The vodka was very good last night, as we all remember, so my voice is improving, hopefully. Yeah, thanks, Robin, and thanks for the invitation. As we already discussed a variety of topics, I would just highlight this one approach Germany took under its G20 presidency last year, and that's the financial inclusion of forcibly displaced person. And this is something we consider as highly relevant, and it affects many of us. I would like to share with you some figures in this regard. So forced displacement has never been a more pressing issue from our perspective, and it concerns all of us. From 2016 to 2017, the number of forcibly displaced persons increased from 65 million to 69 million. That's more people than the population of France or Thailand, with 85% living in developing countries, not in Europe. Yeah, these figures impressively underline the fact that forcibly displacement has turned into a serious global challenge, crisis, whatever you want to call it. Our approach is to provide these households, these families, individuals with tools that help them to manage their very complex, very difficult circumstances, and access to appropriate financial services for this particular target group, let's call them, to better prepare their, very this hardship situation, and also dealing with emergencies. Yeah? And with the opportunity, for example, to store money, to transfer money, to even get access to loans, might improve their lives significantly and helps them to integrate into their new community, local community. And also with safe and quickly usable payments, they are able to receive remittances, also to send remittances. And with good financial instruments, we believe, instruments at their hands, they're better equipped to become integrated into their new economies and their social environments. Therefore, by setting financial inclusion for forcibly displaced persons as a key priority of the G20, GPFI, I think it was a good opportunity to highlight, to create awareness for this specific and this highly vulnerable group, and we did that in close cooperation with AFI, also with CGAP, in a variety of countries even where we try to implement, to pilot first models, also applying good digital financial solutions, at least trying to do so. But on the other hand, just to mention this, it was very important for all of us, and that was a big learning also in this cooperation with AFI and CGAP and other partners, for example, in Jordan with the Central Bank of Jordan, that we need to properly understand the needs of forcibly displaced persons and how they actually currently manage their financial situation. Okay, there was some good progress from our perspective. So in April 2017 in Berlin, there was this gathering, this big high-level conference with governments present, also different institutions present, who took this issue more and more serious, also starting reflecting on these particular challenges. So a key result was that this initiative featured prominently at this G20 summit in July 2017 in the G20 context and this gathering in Hamburg to stress the importance of this work stream. And then the GPFI was tasked by the G20, GPFI, to continue to develop this particular roadmap for forcibly displaced persons. And actually, this roadmap actually, it's called Sustainable, Responsible Financial Inclusion of Forcibly Displaced Persons. Is now discussed next week, 10th and 11th of September in The Hague, in the Netherlands. And the workshop is hosted by the Ministry of Treasury of Argentina and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands. And we are very much looking forward to this discussion. And it's organized in close partnership with BMZ, GSZ, and AFI and CGAP. So I think this will be a big step forward from our perspective, and we really hope that this roadmap will raise and create and increase the awareness for this particular target group. Sometimes we all wonder, do all these political debates, do they really matter? Do they lead into something very concrete on the ground, what we, for example, as an implementation agency would like to see? I believe more and more that anchoring these topics in this setting of a G20 makes a lot of sense and is relevant and important. Thanks.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Now, the clock is rather against us, but I would like to ask one final question to all of the panel, which is around the theme of fintech and innovation that we've been discussing through this week here in AFI. But we know that this topic is also being discussed in the G20, in the Financial Stability Board, FATF, and other standard setters. Most of those bodies have closed memberships and are driven by developed countries. So the question I'd like to ask to the panel is, do we face some risks here of a lack of coordination when it comes to fintech regulatory and policy approaches? And specifically, is there more that could be done around developing and developed countries coming together on this issue? So that's an open question to any of the panel who'd like to respond. Gabriel, please.
Yes, I think that is a really good question, and I think that the interaction between fintech and regulation is not only for G20 or non-G20 countries. It's something common in between, and one good example where I think that coordination and cooperation is important is, for example, on data protection, that our view on the G20 and under the Argentina's presidency is that we need to find a balance between data protection regulation and the use of technology. If data is being used responsibly, I think that technology could help a lot promoting financial inclusion. So I think that cooperation in that sense, in complex issues like data protection, where you have different kind of angles, is really important. So.
Thank you, Wolfgang.
Yeah, maybe I could just come up with another good experience we made in the G20 context in China which had the presidency in 2016. And we were all in China, and there was this very, very interesting panel where we brought 4 fintechs, Chinese fintechs, on stage, and the regulators, let's say, on the other side. And it was so interesting to see the potential for innovation on the one hand side. And we as, well, German Development Corporation, we want to encourage all these innovations. And interesting enough, many fintechs said, well, in many areas we are actually quite lost because we do not yet get enough guidance on the policy side. So there was a really interesting debate, and results were taken forward. As Germany, we highlighted the issue of data privacy and data protection quite a lot in the past 4 or 5 years. Some said, well, these Germans, it's a bit like, they have this German angst for all these, big problems on data privacy and using alternative data, using all the Facebook data for credit scoring and all the rest of it. So yes, we see the potential for innovation, but some 4 or 5 years back, nobody really believed that data protection is that relevant, because we all wanted to see the big potential for innovation. And I think it was good to invest in this topic, to have this, as you mentioned, Gabriel, this balance. And let's not make mistakes again that we, after 5 years of innovation, see all the problems and then we somehow act rapidly, and then often it might be even too late. So this balance is important, and maybe I get the chance, we just last month published a paper called Responsible Use of Personal Data and Automated Decision Making, especially in the area of lending, SME lending in particular, in financial services. I think it's a good publication. I couldn't bring a copy because they're all gone, the ones I brought, the printouts, but if you're interested, I would be most very willing to share this publication with you. I think it's a very relevant topic, and I'm happy that it is also strongly discussed here at the AFI.
Thank you so much. And finally to Lazarus, please.
Thank you very much, Robin. I think in terms of coordination, at an international level is very important, but in each specific member country here, it's also very important that the various regulatory entities coordinate in terms of promoting fintechs. We have various regulators, and the various regulators understand the use of fintech from a different angle. So from the Bank of Zambia point of view, I think we support innovation, because I think innovations will be able to solve most of our problems in terms of making sure that people are financially included. So it's important that within Zambia, all the regulators that are in this area of technology are moving in the same direction so that we don't stifle the innovations.
Thank you. And I think maybe the final word to Zaira. You've talked about the fintech law in Mexico, and you're in a unique position participating in the G20 and also in AFI. So what's your take on international coordination around fintech?
I just want to mention that, for example, I agree that the forcibly displaced person, the inclusion of these people is very important, because this may help them to incorporate to the recipient country. Maybe in America we are not used to have this kind of movements, but for example for Mexico, well, maybe we are going to start this kind of situation like when the countries like Colombia or Brazil receiving so much people from Venezuela right now. But for example, for Mexico, another very important thing is our economic migration. We have almost 12 million of Mexicans living in the United States, and the authorities, the financial authorities, are working very hard to use these new technologies so we can give those Mexicans the chance to obtain benefits from this, to reduce the cost of the remittances that they send to Mexico, or they can open accounts in Mexico and they can send the money from the United States. So it's not just forcibly displaced people, it's also the work between authorities of two countries to give the rights of having this access to financial services to the people.
Thanks so much, Zaira. So I'm afraid our time for this panel has elapsed. So I'd like to thank all the panelists and the two representatives of the G20 presidency for injecting new topics and challenging us to think about new aspects to financial inclusion. And of course, the collaborative work between AFI and the GPFI will go forward, continuing next Monday in The Hague with the event that Wolfgang has talked about, developing the roadmap on financial inclusion of forcibly displaced persons. So please, if you give a round of applause to all four panelists for their contributions this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Can we also give a round of applause for our moderator, Mr. Robin Newham? We'll excuse our panelists from the stage, and we'll just quickly prepare for our next plenary session on payment systems and financial inclusion, innovations to accelerate access and usage. We'll take this minute now, ladies and gentlemen, to please go through the app and just give your feedback. This is an opportune time to give your evaluation as we prepare for the next session. Spasiba, ladies and gentlemen. We'll now begin with our next plenary session. I'd like to take this time to invite our group of panelists to take their seats up on stage. Dr. Grant Kabango, the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of Malawi. Alabakina, the Director, National Payment System Bank of Russia. Mr. Kewe, the Executive Director, Financial Sector Deeping Trust of Tanzania. Mr. Vladimir Komlev, the Chair of the National Payment Card System Russia. And Mr. Alexei Malinovsky, the Head of MasterCard Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Armenia. Please, a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. And our moderator for this session is the Professor Juguna Dungu, the Executive Director, African Economic Research Consortium.
I think we can start. Thank you very much. And I think we are missing one. All that's happened. Oh, it's not there. He was supposed to be the theme setter, but I think he is not there. Thank you very much. And this is my 10th year in GPF. So it means that I've been there since the very beginning of Alliance for Financial Inclusion. So essentially, I'm very happy that we have come this far. I remember I described AFI as a clearinghouse for policy solutions that have worked, have been tested, and they can be replicated across other countries. And 10 years down the line, this is coming out to be actually the truth, and we can see that that's why we are here. And so it means that every topical issue can be shared, and even working solutions can be shared, and they can be replicated, perhaps adjusted to fit some country characteristics. But in totality, I think we have learned from each other. The peer learning model for AFI has worked very well. The topic today for this session is payment system and financial inclusion, and then innovations that can accelerate access and usage. And I'm very happy that I have quite a distinguished panel. And since there's no theme setter, what I'm going to do is to summarize the main points as I see from what this session is supposed to address. Every panelist has a set of questions, but the most important thing is actually to make sure that you relate those questions in terms of putting towards the theme of this session. That is, how do we create an environment for financial inclusion? How do we innovate? How do we make sure that it's accessible and also increase the usage? Let me make a couple of points. I have some few points to make because this is an area that I've dealt with in my life as a central banker. But the most important thing is that, and this is very well recognized, is that payment system is actually the entry point of financial system, or financial inclusion, or financial services. It's the entry point. So essentially, in countries where the payments infrastructure works, then it has become very easy actually to scale it up. But we'd like to hear from you, what is really happening? What is the level of payments infrastructure? And is it scalable? And for us, we have seen, and even examples that I have listened to throughout this AFI Global Policy Forum, is that scalability is an issue, and we really need to ask ourselves, what are we going to do so that we can promote financial inclusion? The second point that is coming also through is that digital financial services, we have moved from financial inclusion enabled by digital financial services, and we are so clearly, even so easily talking about digitization. And digitization cuts across other sectors of the economy, not only finance. And we have seen examples. For me, I've observed several countries in terms of how digitization has been scalable. And it has worked across. In fact, in fiscal policy designs, this a volume that came out from the IMF last year on digitization and fiscal policy design and even revenue administration. So it's working. Second, it has really been used for even tax policy payments platforms. And thirdly, it has actually introduced sustainable business models across sectors. So essentially, digitization has pulled for those countries that have worked. And I remember in that book by the IMF, there was a case study for India and a case study for Kenya, which I actually developed. And those examples were quite clear. So essentially, the payment system using the digitization has reached the unbanked. So it means that where payment systems have been successful, it means also financial inclusion has followed. And also, it has been found that digital payments are enablers, and that's why they're being encouraged. The third point is that what challenges can regulators, even those who are practitioners in this area, point out that has checked effective, should I say, rollout of digital payments? Is it a capacity problem? Is it interoperability problems of platforms? This is an issue that came up yesterday. Is it a consumer protection problem, and how can it be mitigated? And is it cost issues? And I think I've seen some studies that have dealt with this. In fact, when I looked at various studies, in fact, the World Bank has come up with a methodology of analyzing cost of payment instruments. So you can actually, it's a methodology to survey cost of payments instruments. And I've seen a study applied that has applied this, and this is from Albania. And one of the most interesting results out of the Albanian study is to show that actually when you adopt electronic payment system, the bulk of the cost of payments cost, or cost of payments instruments, is actually borne by the payments infrastructure providers. Whereas if you are using physical instruments, the bulk of the cost goes to the consumer. And that's a very interesting result, and Better Than Cash Alliance of UNCDF is using this to encourage electronic payments. Finally, my recent work on this area, and something that I talked about when I was in the public-private dialogue session, breakout session, I talked about 4 areas that we'll need to think about in terms of consolidating the future of digitization. And let me summarize the 4 points. The first one is connectivity. In most countries, connectivity is still an issue. We would like to make sure that nobody is left behind. And this is where actually the MNOs are becoming very, very critical. The second one, of course, you can give us and can deal with the individual country experiences, and we can actually try to find out what exactly we can get from them. The second one is interoperability. I don't have to introduce this subject matter. It has been with us for some time. But interoperability for me, I look at it in terms of increasing the market size and lowering the unit cost. That's where we would like to pitch from. I think I've gone into various countries, but interoperability is being seen like it is going to increase your market share as a competitor. But I think that is missing the boat. The most important thing is to increase the market for us all. You can combine connectivity with interoperability, and you're going to see that the market size is going to increase and the unit cost is going to decline to the benefit of the consumer. And thirdly, electronic ID system, and it was just mentioned here in terms of the previous session. Electronic identification system, or even biometrics, it has come out through and through, but I'm sure it is the one that has checked in so many countries in terms of how you can consolidate the payment system or even financial inclusion. And finally, state and institutional capacity to cope with the dynamics in the market. And for me, this is very, very critical because essentially for regulators to adopt a transformative regulatory technology, we really require capacity to cope with this. So that's the kind of points that are coming out from this, the summary of this session. But the most important thing is that we have an objective, we have some objectives we wanted to achieve, and it is familiar to the plenary members. I think it wouldn't be interesting for me to actually go through them and then obviously then listen to the plenary members going through them. The best thing is actually to try and see how the plenary members can answer to these specific questions, but more importantly, answer to the questions of why electronic payment system, which is actually being the gateway of financial inclusion or financial services, is not being, the uptake is checked in your own respective countries or respective jurisdiction, and what is checking these kind of challenges, and all the other challenges that you may raise. Let me start with Mr. Kewe, who is from Financial Sector Deepening Trust from Tanzania, and he's going to give us his own highlights. It's good that we can spend like maybe not more than 5 minutes, so that we can have time for questions as well as we can come back in terms of summarizing what are the issues. Okay, Mr. Kevin.
Thank you, Professor Njuguna Ndungu. First of all, let me start by, congratulating AFI for its 10th anniversary. It's been a hilarious journey anyway up to now. Also, throw a vote of thanks to AFI for inviting me, the FSDT, to participate in this, a good opportunity to share ideas and experiences. I think, yes, the Financial Sector Deepening Trust is based in Tanzania. We're obsessed in financial inclusion. We work with all the stakeholders, regulators, policymakers, private sector to drive, financial inclusion. But more importantly, impactful financial inclusion through policy, regulatory advocacy, financial sector infrastructure that not only addresses the convenience issue, but also to make the point about the cost of transactions, which is lowering costs. But I think, also thinking about, the new ways of doing things. And here innovation, journey actually begins. We are powered by insights, which is really the research agenda, and I know some of the opportunities here about sharing is about the evidence that shapes the thinking, shapes the new opportunities, but also understands the risks more, and therefore think about how to really improve on our regulatory oversights. So in this case, my question is really on the payments perspective is to set some context. What we know already is that the status of payments landscape in our countries, we know that it's still largely driven by cash. So cash remains to be king. Most of the payment solutions are addressing one problem, and we know from a lot of documentation in our own markets that even when those solutions are actually working, they have other challenges. And these challenges emerge from various perspectives. It may not be convenient, may not be affordable, people may not trust these systems, and which limits the uptake and usage. So in many ways, the inadequacy, the costs, and not being regarded as safe, which is the trust element, are some of the areas that are really affecting the payments ecosystem. In our case, I think what is critical is that as long as we talk about payments being the gateway, payments being the enabler beyond the service that is offered, it is difficult really to imagine expanding credit markets without effective payment systems. It's difficult to imagine how fiscal management, tax collections, as professors referred to here, is going to be possible in the long run without effective and functional payments ecosystems. It's also from the monetary side of things, which you guys in this room are actually responsible. So the monetary policy implementation, if a lot of money is still in people's pockets or at home or in other various forms, it's difficult to actually advance quality monetary policy. Now, in terms of really looking at the trends over the last few years, I categorize this in three main blocks. So first of all is in the regulatory and policy space. The second one will be on the infrastructure side, and the other one will be really on the demand side. I'll emphasize more on the demand side because on the policy and regulatory space, I think this is a common denominator here. And we have seen a lot, and I may cite examples from Tanzania. We have defined the payment space through laws. Payments Act, acts are there. E-money regulations do exist. Electronic Payments Act or cybercrime. I know these countries have defined, and they're all actually meant to really address, this space so that, you give confidence to the market in terms of how they can use these systems. Also, developments in the cross-border, with digital financial services, mobile money in East Africa. We know, Vodacom and Safaricom are partnering so people can really push money across countries or borders. Tigo between Tanzania and Rwanda and Uganda and other places. So all these are actually happening. And it's encouraging to note that, the policymakers or regulators have really been in the forefront. But what has really been the connecting, thread of all these, and countries, through financial inclusion journey, you have come up with a lot of actions, some of them called financial inclusion strategies. I'll use the Tanzanian case where we have the new financial inclusion framework for 2018-2022, which focuses on usage. And the drivers here, I think, are critical because my view is that, Prof, we have focused more on the infrastructure, more on technologies, and less to do with the value proposition, which I'll come to in a minute. And therefore, the role of payments in driving financial inclusion has been rather limited. It's one thing having access, which, through a mobile phone, we have enabled that altogether. But the value beyond that infrastructure is yet to come, and therefore, we need to think differently. In this case, from the supply side, which is the ecosystem now, we have seen, and we continue to see many developments, MNOs, banks, payments companies coming through with solutions. Quick payments processes like QR codes are being developed with M-Visa, MasterPass, Lipa na M-Pesa in Kenya or Tanzania are quite common. we have really seen more of the digitization of payments and less to do with the digitization of processes. And this is where I think, this becomes an issue, because if you only digitize one part of the a transaction, which is the payment part, and not the rest of the activities, you limit the opportunity for these merchants to actually, utilize the payment system in a much more effective way. So some of the initiatives that are ongoing, we see a lot in terms of digitizing farmers, for example. We have, DigiFarm and Safaricom in Kenya. We know that Tigo and NMB in Tanzania, digitizing, cashew nut farmers in Tanzania, and therefore looking at the holistic approach. There are other opportunities in the health sector, in the education system. Merchants, to be specific, if they are actually recording only the digital part of transactions because you've given them a POS, which means the lot of transactions that are done in cash, written on a piece of paper cannot be captured. So the data part, which is important for actually assessing the credibility or the viability of that business in terms of offering that other services is also limited. There are other aggregation models which are looking at, the front-end interoperability of things, really resolving the issues customers are facing is an issue. So in terms of looking forward, Prof here, the interoperability story is the one that is common, and I think we have not given it enough attention because it started from the infrastructure side or the technology possibilities. So we need to think about beyond P2P and therefore drive the other use cases. We need to think beyond MNOs, or a few players coming together, and then it should be all-inclusive and fully interoperable, and it should be beyond bilateral arrangements. And this is where I think, for me, it's important to think about the future of payments ecosystem. And the point I want to emphasize is one, we know very well our territory around regulations and policies. My view is that we have not paid attention as regulators, just like fintechs are, or banks are, or telcos are, on the value system. And this is where I think if we want to really make sure that payments become a key enabler to financial inclusion that is impactful, we have to understand the customers or the consumers or the users of these systems. So from that angle, we will move away from simply digitizing payments and digitizing transactions, and more importantly, digitizing money. People receive their incomes in cash. We can't force them to pay them electronically if the form in which they have that is most convenient is cash. So we need to really start thinking different around there so that when we do this, we understand an environment in which people lead their lives, businesses conduct their affairs, and therefore enabling the transactions themselves will also improve on the payments side. In Tanzania, with the Bank of Tanzania and the market players, we think we need to redefine the payments ecosystem. And my view is that we need to do more research. So right now, we are actually studying, we call it a payments ecosystem study, which focuses on the deep dive for use cases that are priority from the consumer perspective. I think if we do this, and then we also change or tweak our policies to support the utilization of these solutions by the people, by them solving their own problems and not simply driven by technologies, will also help. So this is my view, and this should be the way to think about the future of financial inclusion.
Thank you very much, Kewe. And the 2 points you have come up that have come out very strongly: the cost of cash. And by the way, let's not think that it is only in developing countries that cost of cash. Cash is very expensive. I looked at a Canadian study on the cost of cash as an instrument of payment, and they showed that actually production of cash costs the economy 0.78% of the GDP of Canada. So just imagine, that is just a developed country and it's having those problems. So your point about cash is the main payment system, but it is expensive. And we really need to come out and show the problem. The second point you have made is that you can actually start from electronic payment system, and then all of a sudden we have virtual savings account. And that's what has happened in Kenya, it has happened in Tanzania, it has moved to Uganda, it has moved to Rwanda. So essentially, it is migrating, not only in future in terms of cross-border payment, but actually having a culture, a savings culture. Virtual payment systems are actually very, very important. But I think those are very good summary points that you have made. We're going to follow up on the others. Let me go to Alexei. From where you sit, from the private sector, one of the issues is actually to actually diagnose where is the problem in terms of the payments infrastructure and where do we need to move. On top of the points that you have listened from him and the points that you are supposed to address. And you can tell us more in terms of where you sit, where do you see the payment system moving to in terms of accessibility and in terms of even usage. Yes, that is Alexei.
Thank you, Professor. Good morning, everyone. And first of all, I'd like to thank AFI for inviting me to this honored panel, and also to say that MasterCard is honored to be the partner with AFI for development and advancing financial inclusion. That's one of the key priorities for us as for the company. And before answering your question, Professor, please let me highlight some key trends in the financial services, which I believe may impact the financial inclusion, both from access standpoint and usage standpoint. We all know that digital technology is changing the world. Digital technology is driving change at a much faster rate than any industrial revolution in human history. And increasingly, companies are becoming data-driven and putting technology in the heart of their business. Rapid advances in technology have also driven significant change in users' experience expectations, which is now in turn driving further innovation. Mobile devices are becoming the preferred medium as the digital world increasingly encroaches on the real world, and consumers expect ever faster, frictionless, and convenient experiences. Rise of mobile phones, by the way, helping with financial inclusion, as the previous speaker highlighted. With the number of individual devices and touch points with varying level of security on the rise, the safety and security risks in digital payment systems are also rising, and it becomes more complex to manage fraud. The excess of options creates a trust deficit, inhibits economic growth and advancement of financial inclusion, which hold us back with preference for cash, which is still the king in many countries, slower adoption, bad customer experiences, and paper-based inefficient processes. So the consumer trust becomes vital. At the past year, we all have seen lots of scandals that have shaken consumer trust in everything, from hardware to social networks, hampering long-term innovation, and damaging consumer trust in technology. Lack of trust, unfortunately, leads to stagnation that holds back the progress of society and business around the world. And to promote financial access and usage, earning consumer trust is vital. Trust depends upon consumers trusting financial services providers who act responsibly, companies developing safe and secure solutions to ensure consumer trust in digital platforms is not eroded, and devices and products used for financial services are from a trusted source. These are three key components. A lot of studies done by our company have shown that consumers associate trust with confidence in the safety and security of digital financial services. They take security as given for granted from the company they trust. What we have seen in the payments world is power reversal. And it's likely the same across all other industries, not only payments. Traditionally, merchants and businesses and issuers dictated how transactions happen. Now the power lies with consumers. They demand convenience, while at the same time demanding ever more security. They want just one-click experience without being exposed to more risk, by the way. This is a massive challenge that requires a rapid innovation, and innovation is the key to advancing the financial inclusion. We as MasterCard, we believe in security by design, and we invest heavily in the evolution of multiple forms of biometrics that can be enabled around payments and yet still meet consumers' needs. We are actively developing new global standards to align with and support regulator for stronger authentication. We also heavily investing in authentication technologies. Right biometrics is a part of the trust measure, but it is when this is combined with other intelligence and data points that the real value can be achieved. We have a product dedicated for this, which is called Identity Check. I will not, for the sake of saving time, will not stop on this in details, but it is making available the capability to ensure consumer authentication for online purchases, which are safer and simpler than ever before. We'll give you just one example of other activities and other products. Within our layered security approach in helping regulators to deal with the cybercrime, we have technologies like Safety Net, which is just one example of what we are doing with the banks. Safety Net is a global shield that leverages the power of MasterCard's global network in fighting cybercrime, stopping attacks in their tracks as a second line of defense, and serving as an early warning system to the banks. Thousands of attacks have been foiled, saving millions of dollars in potential losses and reputational damage to financial institutions worldwide. Another layer of that security is Identity Check, which I just mentioned, which uses biometric technology to verify consumer identity when purchasing a product online. So, again, as we are running out of time, just a couple of conclusions. I believe that enabling the private sector to do what it does best, use technology, finance, product development, and operations to build profitable, sustainable business models could help create more effective, scalable solutions that improve the lives of our unbanked population. MasterCard is one of the strategic partners of public-private dialogue platform here. And as a part of our commitment to reach 500 million people previously excluded from financial services by 2020, MasterCard can bring unique knowledge, resources, and technical expertise critical to addressing these regulatory challenges around financial inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexei, and that is very good approach from the MasterCard. Now, having talked to one of them is the market enablers, that's the private sector, then we can go to the regulators. And my years as a regulator, I argued strongly with the market that as a regulator, I was just an agent of market development. And this is consistent with development countries' kind of paradigm. And obviously, it means that everybody who came up with propositions were accommodated on the basis of what they're going to help, how they're going to help the market in terms of the development discourse. So let me start with the Deputy Governor, Kavango from Malawi. And tell us exactly where do you see this payments infrastructure, payment system, payments infrastructure, all encouraging access and usage in Malawi. And perhaps you can also explain to us in terms of your take in terms of even the regional setup.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and again, I would like to extend our profound gratitude to the hosts for this wonderful conference, and the AFI for inviting Malawi to be part of these discussions. Well, Malawi, first of all, I would like to put things in context. Malawi is predominantly agro-based, and therefore, quite a high proportion of its population is in the rural areas. And for those in the urban areas, quite a significant number, again, they are mostly involved in informal trading or informal businesses. And the proliferation of technology or fintech products on the Malawian market, mostly triggered through technological innovations and the other ideological considerations, has provided an opportunity for the unbanked in Malawi to now be able to access financial services. This is a sector that has previously been shunned by the formal banking system. And it's coming from a structural background where commercial banks were mostly concentrating on lending to the major corporates, as is normally the case. And in Malawi, intermediation was not much of an issue because most of the people were shunned by the normal banking system, as the banks normally were investing in securities. Now, the coming in of technology on the market has provided an opportunity for a common man now to be able to access finance. And quite a number of products have been flooded on the market, which now do not require you to walk into a banking hall in order to be able to access such facilities. Now, with just a piece of a mobile phone, you're able to transact in real time. You can transfer funds real time. You can do your shopping without requiring cash. Auto teller cards are now being provided and supplied to almost each and everyone, because now the banks have come to realize that this technology is also bringing in a lot of competition. And so they have to reshape or redesign themselves to make sure that they compete with the non-banks who are also now present in the financial sector. But then all this brings in one challenge, and that is, for the regulator, you have to also reshape and review your legislation to make sure that you check on who is on the market, on what is it that is being brought onto the market. This has not been an easy thing because it means reviewing the legislation, but also building up capacity to ensure that you level up with the kind of pressure that's coming from these technological developments. The other dimension is that those in Malawi, maybe unlike other countries, in Malawi, the tech companies or the mobile money operators, for instance, are regulated by a different body, and not necessarily the central bank. And we always have to work hand in hand to ensure that their enforcement capabilities are up to the mark, because we have to know who is it that is operating in our market and what kind of products they are bringing, and is the consumer not being ripped off. This has called for a review of our own legislation, and also the need to build up capacity to make sure that we match up. The concern has been that sometimes a soft touch would encourage participation by those in the market, but then it may not give our consumers the best, because they will allow some cheap products or, on the market, but heavy-handedness, again, might not encourage innovation. So we have to balance the two. And that has taken us a lot in terms of the review process and the consultative process, because we have to make sure that whoever is coming onto the market is someone who is aware of what is our expectation in terms of protecting the consumer. And so Malawi currently boasts of a lot of milestones in terms of fintech and particularly in support of financial inclusion. The problem has been this is mostly focusing on the urban population, because the rural sector is yet to get on board. Remember that before the fintech era, we were mostly grappling with bankarization. Just go and open a bank account. But then fintech has overtaken those kind of efforts. So in terms of specifics, and as a response to what has come up onto the market, Malawi has implemented the auto transfer ATS system since 2004, and this combines real-time gross settlement and automatic clearing system on the same platform. And it has also integrated the Central Securities Depository for the achievement of derivative versus payment. And the CSD is for both primary and secondary market securities. The ATS also facilitated the introduction of a new payment products and the services like direct debits and direct credits, which were previously not available. Mobile money operators are also present to offer payment services. HSA banking was introduced to extend the formal financial services. We no longer need brick and mortar. Any maize mill or grocer in the rural areas can now do banking services because they are able to communicate with the main bank. And we've now have the Payment Systems Act since 2016. Under the Act, we have issued a number of directives and guidelines to rigorously support payment innovations as well as participation in the national switch. We are currently finalizing e-money regulations to ensure protection of customer funds. And we are working on a framework with the national switch, which went live in 2016 to monitor participation of banks and other stakeholders on the switch for the purposes of enforcing interoperability and financial inclusion. Mr. Moderator, final thoughts on all this. We've heard that the financial inclusion has led to a number of jurisdictions to encourage the opening of accounts. And we've also heard that the number of accounts that have been opened, the majority of them have gone dormant. Similarly, the fintech that we're talking about has to be used. In countries like Malawi, where structural issues still remain a challenge, we may have all this framework, as I've highlighted, in place, but usage may be an issue. And again, we have to look at the proportions in terms of population. How many Malawians will be able to access this? In terms of perception, again, that's another issue. Will one be able to be paid using the fintech technology, or will we insist to get cash? These are the things that we are grappling with in our region. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for emphasizing. It's the payment solutions plus the payments infrastructure that is a constraint. And then it forces us to go back and look at, review the legal requirements to support that market. The second thing is that different actors are there, and it brings different regulators on the table to try and encourage the market. Thank you very much for that. And then we move on to Ara Bakina, and this is approaches in the Central Bank of Russia has taken in terms of financial inclusion. And perhaps that's how does it now relate to even the payment system that we're talking about in terms of accessibility and in terms of uptake. Hello.
Thank you very much for questions. I will speak in Russia, and I would like take this device.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting. I'm listening to representatives of other markets and regulators of other countries. The development of innovations influences financial sphere, first of all. The key elements such as payment sphere. So of course, when we talk about financial inclusion today, we cannot not take into account the payment system's role. I would like to talk about the Russian market and what the Russian regulator is doing in order to increase financial inclusion and how we develop payment systems that help solve this task and facilitate it. Russian payment market is characterized by an active development. It's in fact a process when technologies and products that are used in the market stimulate further development of payment services. We see quite high rate of non-cash payment growth. In 2017, the amount of non-cash payments increased the 50% level, and we expect by the end of the current year to be more than 55%. First of all, it signifies the level of population trust and the dissemination among the population non-cash instruments, and the fact that they are more and more are incorporated into the modern life. The Russian market in terms of the participants is quite diverse. We have a lot of actors due to the size of the country, the specifics and economy. We have 35 payment systems in the market, and they are both retail and gross. We also have payment services that are provided not only by banks but by different service providers. We see active development of pocket money and remote services, and we see the transformation of a traditional banking card. The banking cards in Russia have become the universal access key to banking services, and the total issue of cards in Russia is more than 270 million cards, and for one citizen of Russia, one citizen of Russia accounts for more than 2 cards. So it includes the infants and the elderly population. So we are close to the European level in this respect. Every day in Russia, we see the development of payment infrastructure, and we see the statistics. On average, every day around 1,000 POS terminals is being installed, and in total there is more than 2.5 million of network. And we've talked on this forum and other platforms, the internet and mobile payments development is the work stream that is one of the most stimulating and facilitating the increase of the non-cash transactions. According to one of the international payment systems data, Russia is first in terms of Apple Pay service use. It means that contactless payment is very popular, and it is quite popular among the population. There is a high demand. We've discussed a lot during this week that key drivers for financial inclusion are 3 pillars, 3 work streams. Those are implementation of remote identification, development of payment services, mobile payments, and of course information security. Everyone knows, the speakers in our panel, that trust without the security and safety that the citizens feel, it cannot be real. And despite the good dynamics of the current payment infrastructure development, we see that it's uneven, especially in terms of remote regions, sparsely populated regions, and the internet reach is not enough to provide high financial inclusion. Speaking about the approaches that the regulator in the Russian Federation is taking, I would mention several. First, the development on infrastructural and systemic projects aimed in the interest of all actors and participants. Those are remote identification, fast payment system that we plan to launch starting next year, implementation of a digital profile, KYC bureau. So the whole set of problems that allows to fast, safely take the financial service to each of the citizen of the population, regardless where they are in the central parts or remote and sparsely populated regions. Standardization is a very important work stream, and the Russian regulator pays a lot of attention to this activity. We plan to transition to international standard ISO 2022. We look closely at the dissemination of such technology as barcoding, so everything that facilitates the implementation and further processing of payments. STP processes are very important because it will involve decrease and the reducing of cost, and what colleagues mentioned, of course, interoperability. And a very important factor that I would like to mention is international cooperation. It's important for all those tasks to be solved not only inside the country, but also on the international level, in order for the cross-border aspect to create, not to create barriers for operations. Quite active partners for us are EAEU member countries. Of course, today the consumers are not interested in payment for the sake of payment. So we need to develop a holistic approach to market development, and current approaches are the instrument, the key that will allow us to find application and fast implementation in this industry, because they are quite quickly distributed. Even yesterday the mobile phones were rare, and now even kids have the mobile phones, and even the elderly use this technology, and we need to take it into account in order to connect and to ensure the implementation of payments without the need to go into the bank. And of course, our task as a regulator to contribute and facilitate the distribution of fast and safe technologies that provide for the safe, fast payments. I'm sure that when so many countries pay attention to this issue, I'm sure about the success.
Благодарю. Спасибо, что чуть-чуть вас поторопил, потому что мне кажется, еще один из наших экспертов несколько ограничено времени. Нам дали 15 минут, то, чтобы закончить нашу экспертную сессию. Мне кажется, 10 из них уже ушли. Ну что ж, давайте перейдем к последней части. Итак, Алексей, я вас еще благодарю. Ну, спасибо, что... Хотите еще раз сказать напоследок?
Not only during this session, but overall during all these days. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I have to run to catch my flight. Otherwise, I will have to stay here for the weekend. My family is waiting for me home. So thank you so much, and have a very good, productive day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alexei. Now, we are last to the last speaker, and he has to summarize virtually everything else that we have said and try to say more. He's the chair of the national payment card system in Russia. And the question is the scalability of a payment system in Russia. And having listened to all the people all the panelists, then you have a chance of telling us, how are you scaling up the payment system in Russia? Vladimir.
Thank you, Professor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a greatest pleasure to be here and to speak at such an esteemed forum on its 10th anniversary and being held in our home country. Thank you very much. Recently I had conversation with a representative of another payment system, and we were just discussing the financial inclusion. So I think there is one quote I would like just to mention, that in the end of the day, all that payment systems are doing, in the end of the day, it's all about financial inclusion. Because it should give people the most convenient, transparent, and easy way to pay. Preferably, it should be much easier than to use cash, and very, very convenient and accessible. Our payment system, which has name MIR, and it was given through a nationwide vote in 2015. So our MIR payment system has been created and has been created under the federal legislation. So there was quite a big involvement from the government and the central bank of our country when this system has been created. So due to that, we have a very, I think, unique and specific positioning on the Russian market. The basic aims and goals of creating a national payment scheme was exactly to make electronic payments wider, more secure, more accessible. So it's all, again, even the legislation that has been set forth was about financial inclusion. And the basic regulatory terms that were amended in 2014 and due to which our payment system has been created, they have two major, I think, two major topics and two major aims. First of all the payments coming from the governments and from the budgets of the Russian Federation, regardless of who and how is receiving those, would those be pensioners, would those be governmental officials, or any social payments, they should go to the accounts to which national payment card is linked. So referring to what Mr. Kerry said, if you receive your payment in cash, you would most probably spend it in cash. So one of the norms of the regulation and legislation was quoting that people should be receiving their monies on the accounts linked to the national payment scheme. Second, and we really spent almost a year ensuring this capability, the payments with the use of the national payment card should be accepted across the country. Plus, there was set a certain minimum limit or maximum limit above which a merchant must accept electronic payments with the use of the national payment instrument as minimum. But we also understand that just administrative measures, just regulation will not force people to use cards, to use electronic means of payments unless there is excellent usability, unless it's excellent customer experience, so that people really would want to use specifically this means of payment. We had an approximation of trends. Most of the market before we appeared belonged to Visa and MasterCard, and we saw the trends, how their transactions were growing. I can say that when MIR payment system, and now we have almost 20% of the market in cards numbers, and this is yet growing very fast. So if there was no MIR, the total number of transactions would be lower. So we didn't just grab some of the market share from the leading international payment schemes, we added up considerably to the overall volume of electronic payments. So our payment system increased competition and also added up quite a lot to the overall financial inclusion in the country. When we talk about excellent customer experience and usability, by the way, we created usability laboratory within our payment system, but we also understand that it's all based on technologies. Today, payment is an equivalent to sometimes really high technologies. And I can say that some sort of a sanitary level of technologies in today's payment schemes is really high tech when we talk about contactless payments, when we talk about mobile payments, when we talk about such things as secure e-commerce payments, and all of those is now sanitary level, and we understand that to compete and increase financial inclusion, you need to do something more than just that. So we have a lot of non-financial services linked to the card when the card becomes a transportation payment instrument, easy and convenient to use, when the card becomes the pass to the university for the students, entry pass, and a key access to their basic some sort of university services and databases, and a lot of such things that we're doing, plus understanding that our position is very close to the government, is very close to the, central bank and regulator. We understand that we may implement some new principle and new services, which we call direct financial interaction between the government and people, when some security or social security service payments come directly through our processing, directly to the card. These payments become instantly available to the people with the obligatory SMS notification that they received money, and this service really, and some sort of such services that we do together with the central bank, with the treasurer of the Russian Federation, they really become very, very highly appreciated by the citizens in our country. Certainly we invest quite a lot in different marketing activities which lead to more financial literacy of the population, which in some far regions are yet not high enough. And now when we talk about consumers, this is one side. Another side, to make new technologies, which are very often require a lot of capital to invest. We do a lot to make those technologies available not only to the biggest players, to the biggest banks, but also to medium and small-sized banks. We're creating service platforms which are easily accessible, and we take quite a lot of service load onto ourselves, giving easy and inexpensive access to those who cannot afford such high capital investments to themselves. And very often, these smaller and medium-sized banks, they work in far regions, they fulfill very specific roles for a limited geographical region in this or that part of our really huge country. So we believe this is really very, very important to work in that direction. What I can say, doing this very fast, I believe we really added up to the existing level of financial inclusion and to scale of the electronic payments in our country, and our results, as I mentioned, just in less than 2 years of our existence as a payment system, we are now approaching 20% of the market share, which I believe is a very remarkable result. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. And I think, thank you very much. All along, I thought I would have enough time even to open up to everybody to give us their own input. It shows that this is a subject matter that we have a lot to say and very little time to say it. But I think it's a good indication that it's a topical issue that is going to be with us for a long time. And because I've been warned that our time is up and we are approaching break time, I think it also gives us some time perhaps to engage across when we are having coffee. And that would be quite very, very important. I think from what I've listened to virtually all the presenters, I've grouped perhaps the main points into 3 categories. And I'm not going to elaborate because I think it's something that we can pick up at the national level, at the institutional level, and try to see how we can make it work. And we've seen that the private sector is actually pushing us in that direction, and the regulators are conforming. So the first one is actually financial inclusion will be enabled as soon as we have appropriate payment solutions and even appropriate and adequate payments infrastructure. And if these points have come across, payments infrastructure may be the one that is inhibiting, but also payment solutions that are affordable and can approach, they're very, very important in terms of adaptability. So essentially, we do know that transactions, digital transactions are becoming very, very important. I had a mention of informal sector in Malawi. We have seen it in Africa, the informal sector is large, but we know that informal sector is also taking up retail electronic payments. It means that retail electronic payments are transcending across market segments, different market segments. Even the informal sector is acquiring this complexity of electronic transactions. So it means that once we put our payment solutions right and the payments infrastructure is adequate, they are going to have uptick, and financial inclusion solutions are going to be very, very important. The second one that kept on coming up is actually the operating environment and the legal requirements. And here we have an array of so many issues, from interoperability in terms of even regulatory capacity across regulators. And these are very, very important issues because essentially they help us in terms of, one, the rules of the game must be followed. That's one. The most important thing, aspect of it is also the regulatory legal requirements. That is the legal amendments that or reviews. I think you talked about in Malawi about the legal reviews in terms of, in light of the dynamics or the changes in the market. For us, that's going to be important, but it can also be an inhibition in terms of moving forward. I think yesterday, the Central Bank of Kenya, Governor Njoroge, mentioned that the Central Bank of Kenya managed to move with electronic payments, with the mobile phone products, that is M-Pesa product, without the legal amendments. But the most important thing is that the Central Bank was capable of issuing guidelines to the market to follow. But of course, they were lucky that we didn't have any legal tussle because essentially you cannot use the guidelines in a court of law. You have to have a legal backing. But the most important thing is that the market is confirmable. That's a good example that Governor Njoroge gave to show that markets is always confirmable in terms of the direction you are taking it. The third point that has come up so often is actually capacity to push the market to the next level and to sustain the payments access and even usage. That becomes very, very, very important. Capacity at all levels is becoming very, very important, and it's consistent with the issues that I raised at the very beginning. How do we consolidate the digital process? How do we consolidate financial inclusion through the digital, should I say, evolution? And for us, that's very, very important. I just wanted to summarize with those three block of points, and you can pull them in the direction or that is consistent with the experience of your own respective country or company, and you'll see that those three aspects are actually very, very critical in terms of where we are driving financial inclusion to, and even how payments can be accessible, how payments can increase in terms of usage, and that is the whole point. I try to summarize it in terms of we have to have payment solutions that can be scalable. If the scalability aspect of them is available, then we are going to increase financial inclusion. For me, I think I'm left just to please request you to applaud the panelists. They have provided adequate information, very important information and food for thought for us, and also given us some indication of what we are going to discuss over tea break. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I also ask you to please give a round of applause for our moderator for this session. That concludes this session, ladies and gentlemen, and it's now time for a quick break. I know that we've gone just a little over time. We'll take a break now, and we ask that if we can be seated at 11:45 for the commencement of the next session. So you still have half an hour for your break. Please make your way back in before 11:45 so we can start with our next plenary session. Also for the breakout session, we advise that you take a look at the app for where the respective rooms are for the breakout sessions. Thank you.